I've seen it. The Phantom Café. I've tasted its coffee, and I paid the price. If you're lucky, you'll never find it. But if you do, pray you have the strength to walk away. My story begins on one of those nights when the world feels like it's swallowing you whole. I just lost my job, my girlfriend had left, and my bank account was bleeding dry. I wandered the streets, drowning in a cocktail of anger, regret, and hopelessness. The rain fell in sheets, soaking me to the bone as I moved through the empty city like a ghost. That's when I saw it, a faint glow in the corner of my vision. It stood there on a side street I could have sworn was empty just moments before. A cafe I'd never seen, nestled between two dilapidated buildings. A dim, flickering neon sign buzzed over the entrance. Second chances served hot. It didn't look like much. Aged brick, foggy windows, and a door that creaked open just a crack as if inviting me in. I should have walked away. But something about that place, it called to me. I stepped inside. Warmth washed over me, and for a moment, I forgot the chill of the rain outside. The place was cozy, in an unsettling sort of way. Mismatched tables and chairs were scattered across a wooden floor scarred with years of use. Candlelight flickered on every surface, casting shadows that danced and twisted with a life of their own. A soft, scratchy jazz tune whispered from an old record player in the corner. The smell of fresh coffee hung thick in the air, rich and intoxicating. But it was the people that caught my attention. They sat there, shrouded in shadows, clutching their cups as if they were lifelines, their faces barely visible in the dim light. I couldn't tell if they were breathing. A man stood behind the counter, his back to me. His hair was slicked back, and he wore a black apron that blended into the dimness of the room. When he turned, I felt my heart skip. His eyes were wrong, black as coal, reflecting no light, no life, just emptiness. He greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome. You look like you could use a second chance." I should have left right then. Every instinct I had screamed to run, to bolt out the door and never look back. But instead, I found myself nodding. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The barista's smile widened, stretching too far. "The Phantom Café. We offer a unique service, a chance to change one moment from your past, to rewrite the story." He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to a whisper. "For a price." My heart hammered in my chest, the allure of his words sinking into my bones. Change one moment. I thought of my life. Every regret. Every failure. How many times had I lain awake at night wishing I could go back? Fix just one mistake? "How does it work?" I asked. "First, you drink," the barista said, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter. It was steaming, the scent curling up into my nostrils, making my head swim. "Take a sip, and you'll see." I lifted the cup with trembling hands and took a tentative sip. The moment the liquid touched my lips, I was transported. I wasn't in the cafe anymore. I was there, at the moment that had broken me, the argument that had driven my girlfriend away, my words dripping with bitterness and venom. I watched it unfold, felt the pain, the anger, the regret all over again. My heart ached as I saw her face twist in hurt one last time before she walked out of my life forever. I pulled away from the cup, gasping, and found myself back in the cafe, the barista watching me with that same hollow smile. "You see now, don't you? You have a chance to fix it, to change that one moment. All I ask in return is a small sacrifice." "What kind of sacrifice?" My voice cracked, barely audible. He leaned in close, his breath cold against my ear. "A memory. One that matters to you. One that you cherish more than anything else." His words hung in the air, each one heavy with unspoken promises and threats. "You'll have to choose, of course. But once the deal is made, there's no going back." I hesitated, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me. The warmth of my most cherished memory flashed before my eyes. Me as a kid, sitting on my grandfather's lap, watching a thunderstorm from his porch. He'd taught me how to count the seconds between the lightning and the thunder, taught me that even the most terrifying things have a rhythm. a logic. The barista's smile faded, and for a moment, I saw something darker lurking beneath the surface. "You don't have to decide now," he said, "but time is running out. Once you leave this cafe, the door will never open for you again." The rain hammered against the windows, and the other patrons seemed to lean in, their eyes flickering in the candlelight, watching, waiting. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Just one moment, I thought. Just one change, and everything could be different. I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "I'll do it." His smile returned, sharp and gleaming, and he extended a hand. "Then drink." I took the cup with trembling hands and drained it. The moment the last drop slid down my throat, everything around me warped and twisted, as if reality itself had bent to accommodate my wish. I felt the world lurch, the ground shifting beneath me, and for a terrifying second, I thought I'd fall into that endless darkness. When I blinked, I was no longer in the cafe. I stood outside, on the rain-slicked street, but something was different. Everything was different. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, my heart stopping when I saw her name. It was a text message from my ex, asking if I was okay, if I still wanted to talk. I couldn't breathe. I stared at that message, feeling a rush of warmth and relief that almost brought me to my knees. It worked. But the euphoria didn't last. As I stood there, staring at her words, a chill crept up my spine, and I felt something shift inside my mind, like a door closing. I tried to think about my grandfather, about that day on the porch, but the details slipped through my fingers like water. The smell of the rain, the way he'd laughed when the thunder boomed, it was all fading, dissolving into the same nothingness that had swallowed him whole. Panic clawed at my throat. I tried to force the memory back, tried to hold on to his face, his voice, but it was gone. Instead, something else took its place. A presence, just on the edge of my vision, watching me. It was as if a shadow had taken root in my mind, whispering faintly, reminding me of the price I had paid. The more I tried to remember, the louder the whisper became, until it was all I could hear. I stumbled backward, eyes darting around, searching for the cafe, but it was gone. The street was empty, the rain falling heavier than before, drumming against the pavement like a relentless heartbeat. I could feel it now, something following me, growing closer with every second. I turned in circles, desperate to catch a glimpse of it. But all I saw were shadows, shifting and twisting, just out of reach. And then, in a flash of lightning, I saw them. The other patrons from the cafe. They stood across the street, their eyes hollow and empty, faces stretched into grotesque masks of sorrow. Each one stared at me, their lips moving soundlessly, as if begging me to understand something, to hear a warning that had come too late. I tried to call out, but no sound came. I felt an icy hand close around my heart, and in that moment, I knew. I wasn't alone anymore. Something had followed me out of that cafe, and it wasn't going to let me go. The world began to spin, darkness encroaching on the edges of my vision. And as I sank to my knees, the last thing I heard was that whispering voice. So close now it felt like it was breathing against my ear. You can never truly change the past, but you can trade one nightmare for another. And then the world went black. If you ever see that cafe, you'll feel it first, a pull in your gut, like it's calling your name. And if you don't turn back, you'll pay the price, just like I did. When I woke, I was in my apartment, sprawled out on the cold tile of my bathroom floor, the taste of coffee still bitter on my tongue. For a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a dream, some twisted hallucination brought on by a sleepless night. But then, I saw my phone. Her message, still on the screen. And I knew. It had worked. The mistake I'd made was undone, and she was back in my life. But something else had come back with me. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore it, to pretend that I'd truly gotten away with a clean slate. My ex called me that night, and we talked like old times, as if the fight that tore us apart had never happened. For a moment, it felt like I was waking up from a nightmare into a life that was finally mine. But even as I spoke to her, that emptiness gnawed at me, the absence of my grandfather's memory growing larger, darker, like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. And then the shadows started to move. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion, the tricks your mind plays when you've stared into the darkness for too long. But every time I turned, every time I glanced into a mirror or caught my reflection in a window, I'd see it, a flash of something in the corner of my eye. It was always there, just out of sight, watching me, growing bolder with each passing day. Desperate for answers, I started digging. I went online, searching for any mention of the Phantom Café, hoping to find proof that I wasn't losing my mind. It took hours, but eventually I stumbled upon a forum buried deep in the recesses of the internet, a place where people shared stories, warnings about strange places, and things that shouldn't exist. The Phantom Café was there, scattered across decades, described with the same flickering neon sign, the same impossible warmth in the middle of a storm, and the same fate for everyone who stepped inside. A woman who visited in 1982 forgot the face of her newborn child. A man from the early 2000s lost his ability to dream. Each story ended the same way. The person disappeared, as if they'd never existed, their lives swallowed by the very thing they'd tried to change. My blood ran cold, and I felt that familiar pull, that whisper in the back of my mind, urging me to go back, to finish what I started. I couldn't sleep. The shadows grew darker, and my reflection in the mirror began to warp, eyes turning hollow, like the patrons in the cafe. I'd see them at night, standing in the corners of my room, their faces frozen in twisted expressions of agony and longing, their mouths moving in silent pleas I couldn't hear. I tried to fight it, tried to reclaim my life, but every time I thought of my ex, every time I felt that fleeting happiness, I felt a piece of myself slip away. It was like the cafe was still there, hiding behind every corner, waiting for me to admit my regret, to admit that I'd made the wrong choice. One night, unable to take the pressure any longer, I found myself back on the streets, driven by a force I couldn't resist. The city was silent, the rain falling harder than ever, and I felt it, the pull. The cafe appeared again, but now it was different. Its windows were cracked, its walls peeling, and the sign buzzed faintly, barely clinging to life. It looked old, worn, as if it had aged a century since I last stepped inside. The door creaked open, and I saw him, the barista, standing behind the counter, smiling that same hollow smile. "Back so soon?" he asked, his voice smooth, dripping with mockery. "I told you, there are no refunds." "I want my memory back," I demanded, my voice shaking. "You can take it all back. I don't care. I just want it back." The barista sighed, almost pitying. "That's not how this works. You can't just undo a choice." "But," he leaned closer, his eyes gleaming with a twisted light, "there's always a way to bargain. A special tonight, just for you." My breath caught. "What do I have to do?" He gestured to the seat in front of him, and I realized it was the very same chair I'd sat in before. "Answer a question, and you'll have your answer. It's simple, really." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you regret it?" I stared into his eyes, my mouth dry, my heart pounding in my ears. The word balanced on the tip of my tongue, teetering between defiance and surrender. As I opened my mouth to answer, I felt it, a shift in the room, a ripple of something ancient and hungry awakening around me. The other patrons slowly turned toward me, one by one, as if pulled by invisible strings. Their eyes, once empty and lost, began to bleed black, spilling like ink down their cheeks. Their skin bubbled and warped, faces stretching and melting as if they were made of wax left too close to a flame. It wasn't until the pieces began to fall away that I recognized them. The woman from the forum, the man who lost his ability to dream, the countless souls who had made their deals and disappeared. Each one stared at me with eyes that seemed to beg for release, even as their mouths moved in unison, silently repeating my answer. Yes. The cafe shuddered. The walls buckled and twisted, shifting from cracked plaster into something slick, pulsating, and alive. Veins bulged from the ceiling, and a dark, crimson liquid oozed down the walls like sweat. The wooden floor groaned, splitting open to reveal a mass of writhing, twitching tendrils that pulsed with a heartbeat of their own. The air grew thick with the scent of rot, and I could hear something wet, something alive, slithering beneath the floorboards. What is this? I choked out, backing away, my eyes darting from the walls to the faces of the damned, now twisted into masks of agony. What's happening? The barista's laugh echoed through the twisted cafe, rich and full of malevolent glee. Did you think you were the first? Every soul who steps into this place becomes a part of it. Every regret, every wish, every desperate cry for change. It all feeds the cafe. And now, so will you. No, I gasped, clutching my head as the world spun around me. No, this can't be real. This can't be happening. The barista's smile twisted into something inhuman, something monstrous, and he leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. You want to reclaim your memory, he whispered. Then tell me, what was it you wanted to change? What did you wish for? I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. The memory of my grandfather, of that precious moment on the porch, was gone. Completely erased. I tried to grasp it, to force it back into existence, but all that remained was a gaping void, an emptiness that consumed everything else. Panic surged through me, and I realized, with growing horror, that I couldn't even remember why I'd come here in the first place. What mistake had I wanted to change? What regret had driven me to this place? It was all slipping away, dissolving into the darkness. I don't know, I whispered, the admission tearing through me like a knife. The barista's smile widened, impossibly far, and he stepped back, his voice booming with cruel amusement. Then you have nothing left to bargain with. He gestured to the writhing, pulsating walls, to the patrons whose eyes now glowed with an eerie, hungry light. But don't worry, you're not useless. We always have room for another barista. No! I screamed, stumbling backward as the tendrils coiled around my ankles, pulling me toward the counter. No, please, I don't want this. I don't want... It's too late, he murmured, his voice soft, almost pitying. The moment you took that sip, you sealed your fate. The tendrils tightened, and I felt myself sinking into the chair behind the counter, my skin tingling, burning, as it began to fuse with the wood. I struggled, clawing at the air, but it was as if the cafe itself was devouring me, swallowing me whole. My reflection appeared in the glass of the coffee machine, and I saw it, my face, hollow and stretched, my eyes already turning black, already fading into the shadow of who I once was. I looked up, and the barista was gone. The patrons, the souls of the damned, were gone. I was alone now, the steaming cup of coffee in front of me, waiting for the next poor soul to wander inside. You can never truly change the past, I thought, my mind already unraveling. But you can become part of it. The door creaked open, and a young woman stepped inside, dripping with rain, her eyes wide with the same desperation that had led me here. She looked at me, and I smiled, feeling the edges of my mouth stretch into something that wasn't quite human. Welcome, I said, my voice echoing with a darkness I couldn't contain. You look like you could use a second chance. And as I poured her a cup of coffee, my final thought whispered through the haze of my fading memory. If you ever see that cafe, walk away. Because once you enter, you'll never leave.